Hi, and welcome to another Seeking Asylum review here at Terribly Fun Films. Today we are looking at Bram Stoker's Dracula's Curse, aka Dracula's Curse. I know it sounds like it's a mockbuster to Bram Stoker's Dracula starring Keanu Reeves, Winona Ryder, and Gary Oldman, but that movie got released 14 years before this one, and several years before the Asylum was even formed as a studio. It is also not based on any Bram Stoker stories involving Dracula or offshoots or a different story that they reworked by him into including Dracula. It's more inspired by the legend and the iconography that that book and the various retellings have had on pop culture. And interestingly enough, this is one of the Asylum's longest movies they've ever produced. There might be a few films that they've acquired for distribution from other production houses that are longer, but in terms of movies that they have produced, this sits close to 2 hours. Most of the movies are between 80 to 90 minutes. Given that genre fare, not mockbusters, but typical genre action horror type stuff, is what they were formed to do, this should be a piece of cake for them, right? Join me as we find out. Coming out in 2006, this movie shares 90% similarities to another movie I recently talked about, Transmorphers. Both were written and directed by Lee Scott, and both share astonishing number of cast members and crew members and that sort of thing. That really has nothing to do with anything. I just think it's really intriguing to see. The plot of Bram Stoker's Dracula's Curse is thus. There are vampires and vampire hunters. The vampires are sick of being hunted and killed off by the vampire hunters, and the humans are sick of being eaten and turned by vampires. So the two come together and form a pact in which the vampire hunters will stop hunting them, and the vampires will stop going after humans. I think there's like one caveat to that. They can go after like designated humans or something. It's a little complicated. And then there's a tribe of vampires, all female, who worship Countess Balthoroy, the one of legend who supposedly bathed in virgin's blood to stay young forever, who refuse to go along with it. So the vampires and the vampire hunters team up to try to take them out. Of course, teaming up vampires and vampire hunters doesn't always go so well. And that's your plot. Again, I don't really want to spoil too much. As I discussed in my Transmorphers reviews, one of the things Lee Scott is so good at in his films is world building. He makes movies where the worlds are believable and they feel organic to the story and the plot and the characters. And that is, of course, no different here. The vampire culture has its own language. I don't know if it's based on anything. I couldn't find too much information on that. But there's its own language with its own alphabet, and seeing it written down throughout several moments in the film, a lot of work had to be put into that. This is a low-budget film, you know, so I admire that that kind of thing happened. It's also not as cut and dry as vampires and vampire hunters reluctantly team up to get rid of a bigger threat, which you might also recognize as the plot of Blade 2 and several dozens, if not hundreds, of other vampire-based media, be it books, movies, plays, TV shows, whatever. Anyway, I think seeing that kind of thing is interesting. The rules about vampires being to be invited in still apply unless it's a public place, so they do have some fun with those. attributes and those well-worn tropes of vampire lore. And I think the most interesting part is the sort of safe bunker the lead vampire hunter has. It's not really safe, and it's a weird ongoing gag throughout the movie that everybody knows about it, and they just walk in whenever they like. I'm not sure if I'm meant to find it as funny as I do, but it did get a fairly big laugh out of me every single time. Don't know why. Our main vampire hunter, Rufus King, is played by Thomas Downey, and he's this gruff, badass, whip-ready kind of character, and he's pretty good. Not the best actor in the film, but he holds his own in the action scenes, and some of the later reveals are really entertaining. I think he handles those twists very believably. Playing a descendant of the original Van Helsing is Rhett Giles. I've gushed about Rhett Giles before, and I will continue to do so. There's something about him. I'm not sure what it is. The accent, his looks, those eyes, I don't know. I can't tell you that. But I've never been disappointed in a performance of his, and this is no exception. He's loads of fun here. He gets to play a different kind of character than what you saw him do in War of the Worlds, which was a very sort of praised character. Here, he's pointed, focused, very determined. He does all that well. There's, of course, a bevy of vampire seductresses, because the tribe refusing to honor the pact is all female. And each one of them does a fairly good job. I wouldn't say they're amazing, but they're good enough looking to where you can see how a lonely guy at a bar would easily be swayed by them. And they do a good enough job of being creepy that once they turn, it's mostly believable. There's definitely some overacting going on in that regard. And I don't know if it fits the tone of the movie properly entirely, because this is a fairly serious movie most of the time. Again, there are some one-liners and quips. And then there's Griff First, which I'll get to momentarily. But they're okay. I feel like maybe a bit more direction in terms of keeping it down and not being quite so over the top would have helped in that regard. But oh well. Griff First is in the movie. He plays Konstantinos, who is a vampire who just wants to be left alone. He doesn't kill the humans. The human vampire hunters don't bother him. They in fact come to him for help on several occasions. And I don't get his performance here. Here's more first. He played no nonsense, very barky, yelly kind of guy, but that kind of fit the overall military tone of that film. Here, he plays a laid-back vampire, constantly wearing an opened Hawaiian shirt and sunglasses, and acting like he's just perpetually high the entire time. It's a really odd performance. Not necessarily that it's bad in its own right, but in that it doesn't fit with anything else going on. At least with the vampire antagonists and their overacting, I can see where they're going with that. I can point and go, oh, it's meant to be this thing, that thing. I followed the through line, I'm just not sure how it works. Here though, it's such a difference. It's such a tonally out there thing that I'm not positive it fits at all. It's very jarring to watch, and that takes you out of the movie, and that's not a good thing. Playing Bathory is Christina Rosenberg, and she doesn't have a ton of screen time until the later half of the movie. She's more of a felt presence in the beginning. The movie does a good job of making her seem that way, by the way. The movie's got a really strong sense of atmosphere, thanks to great lighting and solid cinematography. I'll get to those when I discuss those things, though. But when she shows up, she's really badass. She's really intense. and she makes her a very formidable bad guy. She is really fun to watch in the role, and I think it's clear that she's having fun getting to be such a killer character. Playing some of the human vampire hunters are Rebecca Cochran, who is in Transmorphers and several other Lee Scott films like Bluebird Horrors. She's Trixie McFly, and she does okay. She does about as good job as I've ever seen her do, which is acceptable and fun, but she always tends to play the same kind of character. I have yet to see a Lee Scott movie that she's been in where she really stretches out of her signature roles, if you will. So maybe it's just because I watched Transmorphers recently and didn't watch this one. She's fine, but I wish she maybe had a bit more to do, a bit more to push her character to be a fully dimensional character and get out of her sort of badass thing, if that makes sense. Her very no-nonsense kind of character that she seems to always play. Playing Sadie McPherson is Sarah Hall, who's good. She's a little too meek at times to be 100% believable. But once certain things happen in the film, I'm trying not to spoil anything, I think her character becomes stronger and more interesting, and I think she sells that later half much better. Playing the sort of liaison of the vampires to the humans to make the pact and keep the politics and everybody in check is Jeff Denton as Rafe, and he's really good. He does a solid job, he's entertaining, and when it's revealed his true intentions and what he's always been aiming for, it makes total sense. Lots of twists and turns. There's a huge cast of people. There's a lot going on. The movie's super ambitious. I'll get to that stuff in a moment. I like his performance quite a bit. But my favorite performance in the film is that of the character Gracie Johansson, played by Eliza Swenson. Eliza Swenson is always just so much fun to watch. I see her on screen, and I just feel the energy and the joy she has in getting to play these characters out and get to be totally crazy in all these weird sci-fi and horror settings. Her character here is really different than in Transmorphers, where she's a no-nonsense, literal, like, government head type character. Here, though, she's a vampire hunter, she's a bit more playful, a bit more low-key, and it's really fun to watch. I think she does a solid job, and I think that when she gets her revenge later in the film, it's tons of fun to watch. Lee Scott, of course, brings his typical visual flourishes. Once again, that is thanks to the strong cinematography by Stephen Parker. There's a lot of night shots going on, but they're all lit really well, and lots of strong shadows and blue sticking out from the shadows that give the film a sense of dread and creepiness just sort of surrounding everybody as the events culminate in a big crazy mess, which I'll get to at the end, but I need to spoil some things to discuss my favorite thing about the movie. And of course, there's some really ambitious camera moves and dolly shots that make the film more visually arresting than a low-budget film like this really has much of a reason to try to be that engrossing in those regards. The writing is a bit more of a mixed bag. Because there's such a massive cast of characters, and you are covering so much ground. You're setting up the world of the vampires and vampire hunters, their language, the pact, why the pact is being broken, the original pact formed by the original Van Helsing and the original Dracula. So much is going on that some of the characters get sidelined. Plot threads don't really seem to go anywhere. Griff Burst's character, for example, he's basically a narc to vampire hunters on the vampires, but I feel like his character doesn't have a satisfactory ending, and I think following up with him a little bit more, or rewriting it so it's just they have informants all over the place, they keep eyes on that sort of thing, or having the liaison, Rafe, give them that same information would help cut down on some of that thing. Then there are characters like the Old One and Orlok. Yes, Orlok. I know we all get the joke. Who are part of the Vampire Council, who are the head of all of the vampires, and they're the ones who lead the pack. I know nothing about the Vampire Council, other than no women have ever served on it, which, given the movie's backstory for vampires, and that Dracula only ever turned 4 people in the movie's own history, his 3 wives and the Countess. And those 4 people are the ones who actually started the vampire armies, if you will. That seems kind of crazy to me that the second oldest and second most powerful of all vampires wouldn't have been on the council ever at some point. It's weird, but I like the addition of the council. I like the idea of them, but we're given so little to actually culminate and mess with in that regard and understand that it does not work, because the movie doesn't have the time to actually fill us in on everything we need to know about them. If this had a prequel, or if this was a sequel to a different movie and that was already established, that would definitely help. The editing, also by Lee Scott, he really is a one-man show a lot of the time, is good. I don't think the editing's quite as tight as in Chains of Morphers, but there's some really well done sequences, and most of the action is good. There are times where some of the action takes place outside at night. Again, vampires don't go out during the day. That's a little hard to totally make out because it's dark. Even though a lot of the stuff's still lit, it's still dark, and you're still far away to capture all the action, so not everything totally syncs up in that regard. Score by Eliza Swenson, because of course, right? Of course. Is really good. Bathroy's theme is great. It's very ominous and creepy, and fairly reminiscent of the original Nosferatu score when he's coming off of the boat for the first time. If you haven't seen that movie, watch that scene, you'll know what I mean. It's really crazy. It's a lot of fun. And the ending song is great. The ending song is magnificent. I love that song. Now, I'm going to get into some spoiler territories to discuss my favorite things about the film. The movie, before I do that though, I will give you my sum up ideas so you'll know if you want to watch it or not. The movie's good. The movie, oddly enough, when it came out, got fairly decent reviews. Dread Central, Fright Watch, a lot of these places gave good reviews saying that low budget, yada yada, but so they all say it's flawed in somehow, but everybody acknowledged that it's very ambitious, and that ambition goes a long way, and that it's a bit more interesting than other genre fare, low budget genre fare coming out at around that same time, and they're 100% right. The movie is very ambitious, to its own detriment at times, because they've created so much of the world, but they also have such a big cast of characters that they don't have time to explore everything, and that hurts the movie quite a bit. However, the ambition also pays off in having a fully realized world to play with, in having fully realized characters, at least for the majority of our main characters, and having good actors doing good jobs, holding their own in the action. You know, that's important. Now, I like the film. It's somewhat flawed, but it's only flawed because it wants to do so much. Go watch it if you're so inclined, because you'll have a good time. There are some unintentionally cheesy moments that might make you laugh. But overall, I think if you like vampires, if you like horror genre stuff, if you like action horror hybrids, you'll enjoy the film. Now come the spoilers. So, 1, 2, 3, spoilers now. The movie is so ambitious and crazy that ambition pays off in a big way, story-wise, and I didn't want to reveal it earlier, which is why it might have sounded like I was a bit harsher on the film than I actually am. I clearly said, go watch it, enjoy it, yada yada. But the craziest, most interesting thing about it is that ambition. But that ambition amps up in a big way at the end of the film, and that's really where you'll know love it or hate it, basically. I don't feel there's much of a middle ground there, and I loved it. I thought it was really interesting. Rufus King, Thomas Downey's character, is the original Dracula. The pact he made, that is referenced several times throughout the film, with the original Van Helsing, was to give up his powers, never eat or turn another human again, and hunt the kind he helped make. Clearly, after all these years, he still has his immortality. But that was the pact. And that reveal is handled so well by all the actors involved. Everyone at that ending scene deals with it perfectly. From Thomas Downey to Red Giles, who's in the same room, to Rosenberg, who is, of course, the villain of the piece. Of course, this is a vampire movie, and what would a vampire movie be without its impressive makeup? And this film has really great makeup given its budget. Really cool, one exception. Orlok of the High Council, Vampire Council, whatever they're called. His ears look kind of fake. Like, they went to a Halloween store and just bought the first pointy ears they saw and stuck them on the actor. Not that convincing. Outside of that, though, all the vampires and all the Nosferatu, who are undeads and demons who are not vampires. Yes, this movie has such a rich mythology that they include that sort of a thing. Those makeup effects are amazing. Amazing. The more Nosferatu-inspired Old One character, who's Lee Scott in heavy makeup, looks great. We see some demons hunting and or helping out vampires, or vampire hunters in one case. They look great. The makeup in this film is amazing, and just really goes to show how the world building, how much the world building, and how much detail Lee Scott and his team put into the film. It shows how much care they have for the material and how much they're trying to make the best movie available to them, given resources, budget, that kind of thing. I didn't want to give away all the makeup stuff. Dracula's makeup, once he fully transforms and reveals himself to be the original vampire, is amazing. He's able to transport Barbarian himself to a snow-covered barren forest. And he walks up to her. He has these crazy gnarled horns, big fangs, wings, hooved feet. He is a demon through and through. And the way it's shot, the way it's edited is so intense and interesting. So crazy. And by this point in the film, if you're with the characters and you like them and stuff, so worth the payoff that the movie just jumped from like a 7 to a 9 out of 10, if you will, just for that alone, because it's handled so well. It makes so much sense and it's so interesting. Again, the movie is crazy ambitious, and to reach that level of ambition, even when it falters a little bit, and be able to have it pay off emotionally for the characters in a logical way for the story, and have that much love and effort and detail put into the editing, the cinematography, the way the monster looks, is impressive as hell. Bram Stoker's Dracula's Curse is a great film. Flawed though it may be, those flaws strictly come at trying to do so much on such a low budget in such a unique manner that they can't. They didn't have the time to shoot it. They didn't have the time or the budget to make it look believable, or whatever it is. They didn't have the time to fully go into all 9 million vampires' backstories. That kind of thing is where it's flawed. But the villain is interesting. She's a badass, crazy character who hates the humans for reasons that are really intriguing. Her henchmen, the main trio of vampires killing people throughout most of the film, interesting. Rufus King, definitely interesting. His character might seem kind of one note for a while, then that reveal happens and it changes everything. Lighting, editing, cinematography, all really good. Makeup and the world building, phenomenal. Yeah, put that all into a blender and you get an ambitious, interesting, low budget film that is 100% worth watching. As always, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.